Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for a Land Services SA webinar on RTUs and RTCs, which form to use. This is a pre-recorded session with a live Q&A session at the end of this presentation. We ask you to kindly hold all your questions until the allocated time, where one of our subject matter experts will be able to assist. Land Services SA is committed to providing an excellent customer experience. One way we continue to deliver value to the industry is through our industry education program, where we produce a range of helpful educational materials, hold regular webinars, and host industry events. Our industry education program addresses key topics or frequently asked questions to ensure you remain up to date with contemporary practices. We want to help set you up for success and believe helping with industry education will help reduce the volume of requisitions, meaning a quicker and more seamless experience for your clients. Land Services SA's subject matter experts assist in delivering our industry education program, utilising their years of experience and respected place in the industry. This webinar was prepared by Sandy Beaglehole, one of our property examiners with over 40 years experience within Land Services SA. This session will be covering when to use an RTU or RTC document for a plan of division. We will go through different examples of things to look out for to determine what is a transaction and what is not. Hopefully, at the end of this webinar, you will leave with enough information to never have to fully withdraw an RTU document. Included are some tips for what to look out for when preparing your document, things that are sometimes missed and which could save time and requisitions. Before you start preparing your document, you should make sure that you are using an approved copy of the deposited plan. Sometimes the surveyor will give you a plan that they intend to lodge, so you can start working on your documentation. But unfortunately, the plan can be changed before it is lodged. For example, a short form easement could have been added to the plan. Therefore, the RTU that you have prepared may now need to be an RTC, and this will result in your clients having to re-execute. Also ensure you order current copies of the titles to confirm the spelling of the names of your clients, to see if a change of name will need to be lodged prior to your division document. This also applies to the current registered interests. You cannot simply tie up a name. A change of name of mortgagee will probably be required. When to use an RTU. There cannot be any transactions within an RTU document. These 5 points are not considered a transaction. Firstly, check that there will be no changes to ownership and no adjustments to any of the registered interests. In the consent forms for the registered interests, it should always show nil. This will indicate nothing is happening. The only exception is for a land management agreement or native vegetation agreement. These types of agreements can be varied or terminated in the consent form within an RTU. For further information, see Notice to Lodging Parties number 161. If you have this situation where the agreement is going to be adjusted, then ensure that the consent form has the extra wording that is required as shown in Notice to Lodging Parties number 158. Secondly, if preparing an RTU, then service easements are the only new easements that can be shown on the plan of division. Any existing easements that may also be shown on the plan can be ignored. Thirdly, if the plan is showing public roads or reserves being created, it is okay to prepare an RTU, as they will automatically vest in the name of the council. Finally, the last two notes relate to the extinguishment of easements over land vesting as public road or reserve, which are not considered transactions and therefore an RTU could be used. When to use an RTC. These points are all considered transactions and therefore an RTC must be used. Firstly, with an RTC, there can be vestings between the registered owners. For example, they can vest their shares between each other, so each owner ends up with a separate allotment. Secondly, the mode of holding can also be changed, vesting from tenants in common to joint tenants or vice versa. Both of these vestings are captured in the details of transaction panel in the RTC. Thirdly, a third party cannot be added into an RTC document. The only time a third party can be introduced is if there is an allotment vesting to a minister, the Commissioner of Highways, or SA Water Corporation. Fourthly, the registered interests, being mortgages, encumbrances, etc., can be adjusted within the consent form. For example, if a mortgage may need to be extended to cover other land, or if a mortgage is going to be fully discharged, this can be done in the consent form without the need to do a separate discharge document. Fifthly, the creation of short or long form easements shown on the plan of division must be done in an RTC document. Finally, the last two notes relate to the variation and extinguishment notes shown on the plan of division, which are considered transactions. The only exception is when the easement area that is being extinguished is vesting as public road or reserve. Included are 4 examples of different scenarios and things to look out for when trying to work out which document is required for the plan of division. In example 1, there are 2 different easement notes on this division plan. Firstly, highlighted in blue, there is an extinguishment note. Here, the easement is being extinguished over the area that is vesting as public road. This is what the typical note would look like. It would show the allotment number and in brackets will be the name of the road. For example, 203 Evans Crescent. This extinguishment note is not a transaction, as the land burdened in the extinguishment note is public road, and so an RTU could be used. Remember though, that if in doubt, you can always lodge an RTC, as this will cover all scenarios. Secondly, in red, a new short form, free and unrestricted right-of-way to the council is shown, which is a transaction, so an RTC will need to be lodged. In the hints on the right-hand side, you will see that in both these 2 scenarios, the parties in the in favour of column need to consent. In blue, SA Water needs to consent as regards the easement being extinguished, and in red, the council would need to consent accepting the new easement, as this is a short form easement. An easement in gross title for the new easement will be issued, and this will need to be included in the mode of issue in the RTC, and a new title fee is payable. This plan example includes 3 new service easements, as shown in red. These are not considered transactions, so consent is not required for these new service easements. However, if there is a new service easement to Distribution Lessor Corporation, then a Section 31 certificate is required to be attached to the RTU, which is obtained by contacting SA Power Networks. This certificate is required to authorise the lease being carried forward against the easement, as seen in the brackets in the first line in the easement schedule. In this example, there are two separate titles with the same parties, Mary and David Brown. However, one title has them as joint tenants and the other title has them with shares. Therefore, an RTU cannot be used, as vestings are required to change the mode of holding. The mode of holding has to be identical to use an RTU. In example 4, Joe Smith owns two titles and wants to realign his boundaries. His mortgagee on both titles is Westpac, but the document numbers are different. Therefore, an RTC is required. In the RTC, the consent form for Westpac will need to show the adjustment clause, and the mode of issue will show which mortgage is against each new allotment. For an RTU to be used, the document numbers need to be identical on all titles that are involved in the realignment of the boundaries. Here is a quick reference sheet that will be available in the webinar slides to download after this session to help with determining which document type you need to prepare. The left side shows what is not a transaction and where an RTU can be lodged. On the right-hand side are transactions, which require an RTC. This should be helpful when preparing your division documents. Just a couple of points to highlight. If you are unsure which document is required, the best thing to do is lodge an RTC. This way there is no delay in the process and in the issuing of new titles. If you do lodge an RTU and it turns out that an RTC is required, then you will be asked to provide a letter asking for a full withdrawal of the RTU document. This process will delay the issuing of titles by at least a couple of days. Unfortunately, we cannot transfer the fees from the RTU to the new RTC, so you will be required to pay all applicable fees for the RTC. A full withdrawal fee will be required for the RTU, with the refund to be provided at a later stage. Land Services SA's website has a range of educational and support materials to assist you in your day-to-day work. Our Industry Education Hub is a good place to start. This can be found by clicking Industry Education Hub on the homepage of LSSA's website. A copy of today's webinar will be published on the Industry Education Hub together with recordings of previously held webinars. That concludes the recorded webinar section. Thank you for listening. Please remain online for the live Q&A session with our subject matter experts.